Have you ever wished for gentle guidance or comforting word exactly when you need it most? Well, I've created my Love Lives On Oracle deck just for that purpose. Now, this isn't a deck that's about predictions, it's about connection. Every card has been thoughtfully designed to guide you through life's toughest moments, to illuminate your path, and help to remind you that you're never alone, that your loved ones are always there right beside you. So, whether you're seeking clarity, comfort, or a loving message from beyond, each card is here to speak directly to your soul. And along with the deck comes a downloadable PDF guide that you can use that will give you an affirmation for the day, something to reflect on, and even an activity to do to keep you connected to your loved one. So check out the Love Lives On Oracle deck today. You can get it at stan.store/grief to growth. Stan.store, STAN.store/grief, numeral 2, growth. Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hi there, I'm Brian Smith. I'm your host here at Grief to Growth. And whether this is your first time tuning in or you've been walking this journey with me for a while, I'm really grateful that you're here. This podcast is a space where we explore some of life's deepest questions, like who we are, why we're here, where do we go when we leave this space, and maybe most importantly, how do we find growth through the pain? Today's episode is one that may challenge you, inspire you, and possibly even heal you. I'm sitting down with Scott Stewart. He's a speaker and an overcomer whose story is a powerful testament to what's possible when we dare to face the darkest parts of our past and we choose a different future. Now, Scott grew up in an environment that most people would call anything but nurturing. With a manipulative and abusive father and no clear role model of what love or fatherhood should look like, he was set on a painful path early in life. Then, at just 22 years old, a single moment altered everything, marking a before and after, not only in his life, but in the legacy of his entire family. But of course, that's not where the story ends. Over the next 12 plus years, Scott committed to deep personal healing. Through counseling, self-development, and a radical shift in perspective, he broke the cycle of generational abuse and emerged with a message centered on one of the hardest things many of us will ever face: forgiveness. So in our conversation, Scott's going to open up about what it means to truly forgive, not for the person who hurt you, but for your own peace. He'll walk us through 6 common areas where people get stuck when they're trying to forgive and offer guidance for anyone who's still trying to make sense of their pain. So if you've ever struggled with letting go or felt like healing was out of reach, Scott's journey may be just what you need to hear today. And don't forget, this conversation doesn't have to end when the episode does. Head over to grieftogrowth.com/community, where you can join the discussion, interact with other listeners, and connect with me directly. So now let's get in this powerful conversation with Scott Stewart. And before we start, I got to say, Scott is a forgiving guy because I've had to postpone this podcast twice, and Scott's still here. So I want to thank you for that, Scott.
Oh, Brian, that's awesome. Hey, I have a lot of grace. I have a lot of grace to give because a lot has been shown to me. So we're good, man. I'm honored to be here with you, though.
I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you. And I know your journey. We talked before we got started. We both had some pretty stuff that we've gone through, some pretty rugged stuff as far as our journeys go. So start maybe at the beginning. Tell us about your childhood and how that shaped you.
Yeah. Well, let's roll right into it. So you're looking at someone who was adopted at birth. My I was the product of I guess an unwanted pregnancy. Back in 1968, in the end of 1968, and mom and dad who raised me, who were the only mom and dad I ever really knew. My mom was not able to have kids. She just had some things in her body that just wouldn't allow her to conceive. So So I grew up with a mom and dad that I don't know, maybe God designed it that way. I'm not sure, but they were always mom and dad, to me. And we uh, moved to a little small town here in the Northwest when I was 5. And it was about that same time I started to notice my dad had some real anger issues.
Mhm.
And now to quantify that, or what do I actually mean by that? Some of us were raised by men who raised their voice and they got a little loud when they spoke. Well, this was more than that. My father, he could go from zero to rage in probably just a few seconds. And so that was introduced to me early on, and you knew that if you said the wrong thing, that you were gonna maybe get the wrath of dad.
Mhm.
And so I kind of grew up on eggshells, Brian, because you never knew when dad was gonna snap. And my mom, now I was closer to my mom, but mom was let me describe it this way. My mom was a world class enabler,
Mhm.
right? Because every time dad would get mad, she'd always have an excuse for it. Right? Oh, he didn't sleep so well last night. Oh, his back, his neck's been hurting him. He's putting in 12, 13-hour days at work. He's tired. I mean, it didn't matter what it was. There was always a reason for that. So that was kind of the environment that I grew up in and
Mhm.
that I was raised. And so I just knew that depending upon the time of the day or the setting, that any moment dad could snap and get pissed, if I can say it that way. And he was yelling, he was screaming, he was sometimes even throwing things, and it was just what I always felt was just on the edge of losing it, if that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
So that was the environment that I grew up in, and that's about the way that I knew it. As I went through grade school, middle school, and into high school.
Yeah.
So
So were you an only child in that house?
I was an only child until they not adopted, excuse me. They brought in they had a foster child come in, and so
Okay.
and today I still look at him as my brother.
Mhm.
But they brought in a foster child into that kind of environment as well. He's 5 years older than me, so we weren't necessarily that close. But I definitely looked up to him as an older brother.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you learn to navigate your father's anger?
Holy smokes. I don't know if there ever was.
Mm.
You face the wrath of it. Um, you didn't put the screwdriver back in the right toolbox drawer. You left the end wrench on the workbench. You didn't lock the door last night. I mean, it just anything that could have set him off did.
Yeah.
And so I think that it wasn't so much learning how to navigate it, it was just living in fear, Brian. I think
Yeah.
that's the best way to say it, and what we could have an argue or we could have a discussion on maybe a little bit of fear sometimes in certain situations might be a healthy thing. It keeps us alert, it keeps us
Mhm.
aware, but growing up with a father that you're fearful of, yeah, I'm not convinced that maybe was the best way to bring up a son into this world.
Yeah. Well, I say that all emotions have their place. All emotions have, and fear, not that we want to live in fear. I
Right.
completely agree with that, but having fear keeps us safe. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of times when people grow up in those environments, they become hypersensitive and they learn, or at least as much as possible, how do I navigate this? When can I see a trigger point and maybe get away? So I don't know if you've experienced any of that, or if it was just like, it was like at any time, it sounds like he could maybe go off.
Yeah, I did, as I got older, I did learn the freedom of not being home.
Mm,
And so, going over to friend's house, going over to my grandmother's house, and then when I got my driver's license, that freedom not only meant as a teenager to be free and go do fun things, but to leave that environment.
Yeah.
There was a freeing or freedom about that. So there was some of that definitely as I got to be in my middle late teens. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you never really felt safe at home.
No,
Would
I
that be
never
fair?
really. No, that's a great way to say that. Even on some of the most enjoyable, memorable things that a family should do, and I'm going to call it like Christmases or
Right.
holidays, picnics, camping trips. I mean, those are supposed to be really bonding, times. And even with a lot of those, Brian, I have and held more negative memories, about a lot of that than I did positive ones, simply because of my father.
Hmm. Now I know you did reach a turning point in your life in the early '90s, I guess it was. So what happened at that point?
Yeah, yeah. I there was a there was well, and let me put some context to this before I answer your
Sure.
your question directly. But there, I had moved out when I was 18, and which was a beautiful thing. That really needed to happen because the amount of hmm, toxicity, maybe
Hmm.
that's what we're going to call it, the
Hmm.
amount of toxicity from my dad, it had reached new levels, and I couldn't be around him. I couldn't be around him for any more than 5 or 10 minutes. And so when I moved out, I experienced a lot more of freedom and just enjoyment in life. Now, this was obviously right after school. Well, I had scheduled a dinner with my mom and dad, and this would have been in August of 1991. I had scheduled a dinner at their house after work. This was on a Monday night. And I show up over there. We're getting ready to have dinner, and my mom made homemade spaghetti. And oh my gosh, mom did such an amazing job with spaghetti. It was just incredible. So I was um, ready to hang on just one second. Sorry.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, all kinds of noise going on outside. My apologies. So there, so I sat down. We had dinner. We broke bread. Had spaghetti. It was fantastic, Brian. It was just amazing, and everything seemed fine. My dad's anger was in check. Good conversation with them. And a couple hours later, I got ready to leave the house. I walked to the front door, opened, got ready to go through. My mom followed me through, and she says, "Come here, you." She says, "Give me a hug, give me a kiss." And like any good son, I turned around, kissed her on the cheek, held her, and said, "I love you." And she said, "I love you too." And what I didn't know was that was going to be the last time I would ever see her again. And what happened later that night, hours after I had left, in a fit of a rage, my dad, in a very barbaric, in a very ugly way, while my mom laid sleeping in her bed, he took her life.
Mm. So sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And it, as you might guess, everything changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got the phone call at 11:30 and from a family member, and he said, "Hey, you got to get over here to your mom and dad's house, like right now, get over here." And I remember throwing on some clothes and driving over there, and or at that time they lived on a straight, very straight country road. And when I turned onto the road and headed, I could see a small city of lights down there by their house, and I knew, you get that feeling in your stomach that something is really, really wrong. And I pull up to the house, and I met with law enforcement, and there's the do not cross yellow tape, and there's state police, county police, city police. I mean, and there's paramedics, ambulances. It just looked like something out of a movie.
Mm.
And to speed the story along, the officer had told me that my mom was deceased and they had my dad in custody. Now I was 22 years old and no real foundation, no real direction. And you when you're told something like that and you take a moment to try and process it, it's more than you really can process in a moment,
Yes.
you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I remember just kind of going numb. Brian, there's really no good way to say it, but when you're met with something like that that is so horrific, you get numb, and maybe you have some emotions of sadness, anger, more sadness, more anger along the way, you know.
Right.
And they hauled my dad off to county jail, and it's interesting. I've often said this, that we often think that the world stops, and something a horrible tragic event like this, the world stops. Well, the world doesn't stop. It keeps going.
Yeah.
And it for about 2 years I kind of went off the rails, um, drinking to medicate, just so I didn't have to feel so much hurt, so much pain, sorrow.
Yeah.
It wasn't drinking to just get blotto drunk all the time. It was drinking just to numb the pain. I was self-medicating. That was the only way I knew how to get through the day. You
Sure.
know, a few months after that, he's in jail, and I'm self-medicating. Come to find out, there were three young, at that time, they were teenage girls, or late teens, but they had they had come forward. There was three of them, and they had said, "Hey, look, we didn't really want to say anything, but he inappropriately touched us multiple times."
Mm.
And so now we have child molestation, we have murder, and it's one of those things that if it's possible to just feel nothing, I think that's kind of where I was at, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So all of this happens, and how does one process that? How does one continue to walk through life? Because at the end of the day, you still got to go to work. You still got to get up. I mean, you still got to go throughout your day. And I was, for a couple of years, I was in a pretty dark spot.
Sure.
And I remember I was at work. I was in the cafeteria at my place of employment, and there was a gentleman there, that coworker, and he was a Christian guy, and a lot of people knew that. And Brian, I was having a rough day. This one day particular was worse than most. And he came and sat beside me at the table, and he asked how it was going, and I was like, yeah, yeah, it's going, getting through it. And he stopped and he looked at me and he goes, "No, how's it really going?"
Yeah.
And man, I just about broke down and lost it. I just couldn't hold it together anymore. And he said, he goes, "You can't keep living like this, right?" And I knew he was right. I knew he
Yeah.
was right, because I was heading down a pretty dark path. And that day kind of started a change, because I knew that I needed to start dealing with this stuff, or it was gonna destroy me.
Hmm.
It was just gonna destroy me. And so that, to come to answer your question, 10 minutes later, but the I found a counselor, I found a therapist, and I kind of immersed myself into self-development, self-growth, and started to slowly undo the things in my head that a lot of what my father had done,
Hmm.
and started to process this stuff, and started to undo or unprogram the way that I had been programmed, through a lot of guilt, a lot of manipulation, uh, all sorts of very toxic, destructive, things that I had learned,
Yeah.
growing up.
Yeah.
And so that started a new trend, and that is that I'm going to heal from this. I'm going to get past this. I can't let this weigh me down. I use the example or the metaphor, Brian. Imagine if we have a backpack on, and somewhere in high school we put this backpack on, and every traumatic event, and sometimes a lot of traumatic, sometimes a little bit traumatic, but every time we put a brick, we put it in our backpack. Every
Hmm.
time, right?
Hmm.
And before we know it, we go into adulthood and we got this backpack full of bricks. And I knew that if I did not empty out the bricks, uh, my life stood no chance. No chance
Yeah.
of happiness. No chance of making relationships work. No chance of making a marriage work, and no chance of being a good father. I wanted to be a good father, but I hadn't had an example set for me. So that kind of started a new pattern, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. Wow. I can only imagine the emotions. I mean, you talked about the numbness at first, and I think anybody that's been through a deeply traumatic event can understand what you're saying. And I know it's hard for people who haven't been through that to understand, but there's like you can only take so much, and there's like a circuit breaker, and it's just like, and I've heard people say, I thought I was broken because I wasn't feeling anything. I should have been feeling all these things, and then the feelings start to come. Anger. Guilt, depression, sadness, all those things I could imagine that you must have been cycling through. And then to add the child molestation on top of that, that seems like, even another betrayal. So I do want to touch up on a moment though, when you talked about when you were leaving and the way your mother, the last time you said goodbye to her, because it just really struck me. I hear that so often. Was that the way that your mother would normally said goodbye to you, or was there something different about that moment?
Yeah, great question. I, this has ran through my thoughts too, probably 100 or 200 times. I think I think this was a little bit different for her to follow me actually to the door.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now, give her a hug and say goodbye and walk out the door. That's not a big deal, but for her to actually follow me and then follow me kind of out and give me a hug and I don't um, I think it was a little different that time, and
Yeah.
I'm very thankful. Very, I've been very thankful for those seconds that I
Yeah.
got with her. But yeah, not necessarily the norm though. No.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to touch on that because I do find that happens sometimes. And it's one of those moments as we look back in time, it's like neither one of us had any earthly idea that this was going to happen. But there's
Yeah.
something I think in spirit that speaks to us in those types of moments. So here you are, you're a very young man. Your father has betrayed you in a way that's like not even imaginable. You're going through all the things, and you said you're coping, but it's eating you up inside.
Mm.
So, how was your relationship with your father? He's in jail or in prison or whatever. Did you go to visit him? Did you talk to him? What was that like?
Yes, a great question. About 2 or 3 weeks after he was incarcerated in the county jail, I went and saw him. And I have a half sister because he was married before previously,
Mm,
and he had two daughters with that woman. So I have
mm,
what I would call a half sister, and my half sister wanted to go see him. And she asked me, she said, "Do you want to go with me?" And I kind of hem hawed, and I was like, "Okay, I'll go." And for her, she was like, "I want to look him right in the eye, and I I want to make my own, determination. Did he actually do this?
mm, mm,
And so she was coping with it in her own way. So we went and saw him, and I remember sitting there, just like it was yesterday, Brian. But you've got the glass, you got the phone, and he's wearing the orange jumpsuit, just like what you'd see in TV. And this is another very telling piece to the story that will answer some of your question. We small talked for a moment, And then he looked right at me, and someone who is really, really good at manipulation, they can almost do it with just the way they look at you. If they've done it enough, they're that good at it. And my dad had military grade manipulation skills. It
Mm.
was impressive and not in a good way. And he's looking at me, and he looked at me and he goes, "Do you think I killed your mom?" And I said, I I don't know what to think. I'm hoping this is a really bad dream. I'm
Yeah.
hoping this is a nightmare that I wake up from. I don't know. And that was genuinely how I felt at the time, right? I didn't want to believe that he could do such a thing, but I said, I don't know. I'm just trying to get through every day. And he
Mhm.
looked right at me, Brian, and he goes, "Well," he goes, "I didn't. But I told the police I did to cover up for you because I thought you did it."
Oh, wow. Wow.
True story. And comes back to that what we both were just talking about a moment ago of when you feel nothing
Hmm.
because there's just so much, and it kind of just it kind of went by me like, what?
Right.
And that was the last time that I had communication with him.
Hmm.
And after that, I had decided I'm there's no reason, at least for right now, for this year, next year, there's no reason to have communication with him. I did see him in court 4 years, 3.5, 4 years later at his sentencing, because when you admit to a murder in the state of Oregon, you go straight to the front of the line for sentencing. There is no trial. You admitted guilt, you admitted murder, and you go straight to the front of the line for
So he did
sentences.
admit it.
He did admit it.
Okay.
Yeah, he did
Okay.
admit it. And I saw him at the sentencing, and had no communication with him, but we exchanged, eyeballs
Hmm.
across the room. But I never did have a relationship with him after that.
Wow. So, at what point does forgiveness come into this? And I ask you this because forgiveness is such a tricky thing for all of us. And I've talked to people who have said, this person did something to me. You just don't understand. I cannot forgive this. And I'm always fascinated when I talk to someone like yourself, who's, an example of like, this is beyond if anything is beyond forgiveness, it's this. So what did someone say to you? You have to forgive him. And how did you get to the point where you realize this is something I need to do?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm testing out a new feature. I'd love to get your feedback on it. It's called Fan Mail, and you can send me a message right from the show notes of the podcast. So look for the link that says send me a text. You can ask a question for a future podcast. You can suggest a guest or just give me any feedback you want. Just remember, it is one way. I can't text you back, and I will not have your name, your email address, or your phone number unless you include it in the message. Let me know what you think.
I appreciate that. Thank you for acknowledging that. I I think to answer that, I want to start out with that somehow I knew, and did I know it right away? No, I did not. But I eventually knew that if I didn't forgive this, and what, let me quantify something when I say forgive.
Mm-hmm.
Release it, and maybe we use that word for right now instead of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I had to release it because if I didn't, it was going to destroy my life. I somehow knew that. Divine, probably. Other than that, I don't know that I can tell you how that is.
Yeah.
But I just knew. I just knew that if I continued to hang on to that bitterness, that anger, the betrayal that I felt, it was going to take me down a bad road, man. So when did forgiveness start to come into play? I had been going to therapy for about two and a half years, and we were making some headway. And let me share with this as well with your listeners. I understand if someone doesn't get the right therapist, or they don't find the right counselor for them, therapy doesn't always do kind of what it can or what it's capable of. And I understand that. I'm very compassionate, empathetic to that. I happened to find the right one. I really, truly did. Not on the first try, but on the second try, I found the right one, and she was able to help me to work wonders. And so we started undoing, in that 2.5 years, Brian, we undid a lot of the things up here. And it was about year 2, somewhere around there, that she kind of had mentioned, started talking a little bit about, like, do you ever think you could forgive your father?
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of, I can look at it now and kind of laugh. At the time, it wasn't funny.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, I know all about that forgiveness thing. Yeah, we don't need to even talk about that, right?
Right.
And I know all about that. And she was, again, she was the right therapist for me, and she could tell that I needed to have an adequate or a proper understanding of what forgiveness is,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that started a little bit of that path on understanding and having an accurate belief of what forgiveness is.
Yeah.
Because here's what I know now. If you and I hold an accurate understanding, an accurate belief about what forgiveness is and who it's for, I believe anything is forgivable. If you hold the right understanding of what it is and who it's for. That's
Absolutely.
the key. That's the key component. Okay. Now you're talking, I can say that because I have forgiven murder.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So understand, I'm not just someone preaching from the front of the room that has never been through this.
Yes.
Right. So in that counseling, it started to become very evident that I had a very screwed up false belief of what forgiveness is.
We all do. Most of us do.
Yeah.
Most of us do, and that's why this conversation, I think, is so important. So let's break those two things down. First of all, let's talk about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't.
Yeah, you betcha. Here's the best definition that I've been able to come up with. I believe forgiveness is releasing the hurt and the anger and the bitterness so that you can continue through your life without it falsely or negatively adversely affecting you.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean it goes away. That doesn't mean that you forget about it. It just means that, like right now, you and I are having this video call, and I can talk about this, and it's not raging me. It's not making me angry, right? I can talk about my father in somewhat of a healthy state of mind without it having me go sideways.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's now that's for me. Now that may not be for everybody, but that's my definition for me of what I've came up with.
Yeah, I think it's as good as any. And I heard one definition. I think it was Oprah Winfrey that said this. Is like forgiveness is, and maybe she wasn't the first person that said forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. Because when we're holding on to things, it's almost like we're trying to change the past, and so there's some acceptance and forgiveness, not in that it was right, but in that it actually happened.
Yeah.
And then the other important component is who it's for.
Yeah. Oh goodness, this was one that I struggled with, buddy. I struggled with this. There's so many preconceived ideas, and you and I have probably both heard numerous times. We've heard people say that I'll never forgive them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I could never forgive them for what they did, and I understand. I have compassion and empathy where they are coming from because I stood in those exact shoes.
Sure.
The difference is that forgiving them has very little to do, if anything, about them, and it has everything to do about us. Us as in this case, the victim, the person who was wronged, the person who was betrayed. The forgiveness piece did nothing for my father. Did nothing. Nothing.
Right.
Zero. It what it did was allow me to release and let go and not be kept hostage by that hurt. And so the forgiveness was for me. It
Yeah.
it it was never for him. It is completely total irrelevant. In fact, you could look at it this way. I'm not saying I do, but you could look at it and go, it's completely irrelevant to them whatsoever, because forgiveness just totally is on the person releasing all of that negative energy, emotion, madness. I mean, the list is long, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's for me. It's for us. It's for you. It's not for the person who hurt you.
Yeah, and I think that is again that's so key. And I also believe that forgiveness is a process. I mean, we can talk about that on an intellectual level, but it doesn't mean that like, oh, I'm just over it. I mean, it takes a while to set that righteous anger aside, because there is some righteousness to that anger. I mean, we have a right to that, and I think some people they hold on to that and they say, well, this is my right, and because this was so egregious, it's my right to, and it's like you want to say, yeah, it's your right, but it's like holding a hot coal in your hand. You can hold on to it, but it's going to burn you.
And it's going to hurt like hell. Can I just say that?
Yeah,
It's going to burn. It
yeah.
is, and it's going to leave a nasty scar by hanging on to it.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah. Now, I know as you've gone through your understanding and your growing, you've identified 6 areas where people get stuck when it comes
Yeah.
to forgiveness. Can you give us what some of those
Yeah.
are?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. We'll start off on the first one. The A lot of people feel like that if I forgive the person, that I automatically have to trust them again, or I have to give them access. I have to feel like, okay, we're going right back to where we were before the event, before the betrayal,
Mhm.
before the wrongdoing. And no, 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 you don't. No, forgiveness and trust, or call it access. Those are different. Those are different things. I can forgive someone, but you're not gaining access back to me again, because the trust has been broke.
Right.
So right. So I look at it like this, Brian. I can choose, my choice, not anybody else's, my choice to forgive, which is release, but I do not choose to trust you because the trust has been broke. Now could I say maybe someday after the trust has been proven? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could have that conversation, of course. But I think also too, the person who was offended, the person who was hurt, has the right to say, no, blocked access. I'm not going to take another chance. You're not going to hurt me like that. You're not, whatever that is. And in
Mhm.
that was my case with my father. No, access denied.
Mhm.
he was, a little side note, which is why I chose this path. My father was never remorseful for what he did.
Mm.
Never, never.
Yeah.
And because of that, no, access denied.
Yeah.
Our relationship is severed. I let go of the hurt. I wished him well. I did that through a note.
Mm-hmm.
I was not mad at him. I didn't cuss him out. I didn't yell and scream at him. But I said, I forgive you for all the times you've hurt me, but you're not welcome back in my life.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so, yeah, so I think, trust, access, that doesn't go hand in hand with forgiveness. It does not.
Right.
So that's the first one. I think the second one is, as we already covered, but for who forgiveness is for. It's for us. It's not for the other person. I think if we get caught up in that, thinking that forgiveness, is for the other person, it can get us kind of wrapped around the axle, if you will, which brings me into the third one, which is people often think that if I forgive them, I've excused their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of have said, well, I forgive you, so whatever they did is kind of like just brushed under the rug.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Not true.
Right.
Not true. Absolutely not true. Nope. There are always consequences to actions.
Right.
100%. It's unavoidable in this world anyway. It's unavoidable. And I never, ever once excused the behavior of my father, in addition to what he, taking my mom's life, but all of the time, the way he treated me, how he belittled me, he humiliated me in front of friends and family. That was never excused, but I was still able to forgive him.
Right.
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 Fourth one is, and you touched base on this a little bit when you said that forgiveness is a process, and I'm going to use I'm going to use a little bit of scripture reference. I'll keep it light. This isn't church by any means, but it's the best example that I've found. In Matthew 18:21 and 22, Jesus is teaching to a group of people. We don't know if there was a dozen people there or 200 people there. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But this is when he is teaching, and Peter says, and the reason I use this scripture is because a lot of people have heard it, but he kind of butts in and he says, how many times should I forgive him? Should I forgive them 7 times if they've wronged me? Right? We've all heard this story before. Should I forgive him 7 times? And I'm sure Peter probably thought, 7 times, that's a good number. That's a lot of grace.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what does Jesus say? He goes, little light there. How about 7 times 70 or 7 times 77? Or depending on which translation you read.
Right.
It's a lot.
Right.
It's a lot. What did he mean by that? I can only tell you what my conviction is. And I don't tell everybody else that they should have the same conviction. I don't tell anybody to believe what I believe, but this is my conviction, and it's more than a belief. It's something that I have lived, and it's kind of become a part of who I am. Forgiving my father, I had to do it more than a few times, more than a dozen times,
Right.
more than 50 times, more than 100 times. And let me give you some examples of what I mean. When I first started the process of saying, nope, I'm going to forgive this man. I choose to forgive him. I didn't feel that wasn't a warm and fuzzy thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want to say it, but I knew I needed to. And then it got to the point where I started saying it. And then, like, as an example, Brian, we have where I live, when the snow level comes down, the snow level comes down, comes into the mountains, and a bunch of my friends and their dads, we all took our 4-wheel drives, we go up in the snow and build a big fire and hang out with our dads. And I was the only one there without a dad.
Mm.
And I realized I'm going to have to forgive him again because he's not here.
Mm.
And then at Christmas time, when my wife and I were married, my first Christmas with my wife, my mom and dad weren't there, and I had to forgive him again.
Wow.
And when my wife and I got pregnant with our first daughter, and the excitement and the joy, and I couldn't share that with my mom and dad, and I had to forgive him again. And then when the day my daughter was born, Brian, she's seconds old. She just came out of my wife. She's seconds old. And the nurse says, "Okay, Dad, you hold her." And I'm holding this beautiful little girl who's crying and screaming and just tears coming down. And I realized I had to forgive my dad again because my mom couldn't be there to hold her granddaughter.
Wow.
Forgiveness is a process. And that process may take time, and it may take a dozen times. It may take 30 times. I probably had to forgive my father. I don't know, Brian, 150, 170 times. I don't know. I lost track. But every time that anger or those negative thoughts, those hurtful thoughts would come in, I had to choose to say, no, no, no. I'm not going to get mad over this. I'm letting it go. I forgive him. I'm not going to hang on to it. I had to do that over and over and over and over, probably 11 to 12 years, Brian.
Yeah.
How do you forgive something like that? I just told you. That's the process. At least it was for me. Okay. It was for me. And maybe somebody else, maybe it's only a couple years, maybe it's only 6 months. I don't know. But that's what it took for me. And finally it got to a place where I no longer had to forgive him. Because why? Because I wasn't mad about it. I wasn't angry.
Yeah.
Sad that my mom wasn't at Christmas. Yeah, of course. Mad at him? Nah, no.
Well, I've never heard it put that way before, Scott, and that's very powerful. I mean, very, very powerful what you just said, and I've heard that verse in the Bible, and as you were saying it, I was thinking, there's a couple of things. One is you just talked about it. It might be an act that happened in the past. It might be several acts that happened in the past, but it has reverbs through the future, right?
Right.
So you've got it's still coming up, and you have to forgive over and over again. And it's also that thing about, like, when Jesus said that, as you were saying, I thought, what happens, because some of us can get very legalists like Peter was, right? Seven, right? Seven. Oh,
Yeah.
7 times 70. Okay, well, that's 490. So what happens at the 491st time, right? It's like,
Right.
yeah, 490, yeah, you got it, but 491, I'm done. But when you understand that it's not for them, it's for me,
Yeah.
then I got to let this go too.
Got to
I
let
gotta
it go.
this go too, because there's holding on to it's only hurting me.
100%. 100%. Moving along real quick here, I think, which is a great segue into the next one, is you have to want to. You have to want to do this. This is not something that you're like, well, one day I'll forgive them. What does that mean?
Right.
One day. What does that mean? No, you look, again, this comes back to something I said when we first started, and that is that I didn't want this to screw up my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was young when this happened. I had a whole life ahead of me. And I didn't want to be the kind of father for my kids that my dad was for me.
Yeah.
I didn't want that.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a better father. I wanted to be a better role model. I wanted to be, I didn't want to be just an okay dad. I wanted to be a great dad.
Yeah.
So forgiveness is something you choose, and you have to have intention if you're going to do it. And it doesn't just happen automatically. It's not some magical thing that just poof, whoa, I forgive him today. No, that's not how it works. So if you're holding or well, yeah, if you're holding on to thoughts of I'm going to get revenge, or if you're thinking like I hope that blankety blank blank rots in hell, and I mean, if you're holding those things, pretty hard to be intentional about forgiving.
Right.
Now, do those kinds of things, are those part of the processes and the things that you will feel along the way? Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. But here's the empowering piece. I hope nobody misses it. You also have a choice to move on from that.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? It's every day. You say, you know what, today I'm going to forgive them. And if those thoughts come back into my head and remind me of how much that hurt, they violated me, they stole from me, whatever they did, if you continue to entertain those thoughts instead of thinking, nope, not today, not today, I'm choosing to forgive them, you're going to be stuck. You have to be intentional about forgiving. You have to want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about choice also, because I
Yeah.
think that's another really interesting thing. And you just talked about how choice is involved in forgiveness, but there's also this aspect of you that says, you were adopted, so your birth parents for whatever reason weren't able to take care of you, so you're adopted. You're adopted into a family where your father's not showing you any kind of a role model of how to be a good father, but you made a choice. You made a very intentional choice to break that generational legacy, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
So help people understand, how do you do that? Because I heard people say, well, I can't. You don't understand. I can't make that choice. This is the way I was raised. This is what my father modeled for me. How did you do that?
So this comes back to the piece when I told you that I dove into personal development. That in my call it mid to early 20s, those that personal development piece and the videos, the audios started introducing me to something that I had never heard before. And that was, you don't have to be a victim to your past.
Mm,
You don't have to stay the way you are. You actually can make different choices. You can hang around different people. It all depends on who we listen to, right? So it was the personal development piece was very powerful for me in helping me to see a little bit different way. Um, the aspect of, wait a minute, I don't have to stay like this. I think when people say, well, this is how I was raised, this is all I've ever known. Okay, I understand that. Does that mean what? Does that mean you're not willing to try something different?
yeah.
I mean, does that mean, are you trying to tell me that you want to stay in your comfort zone and you're not willing to entertain and do something different and
Mm,
look at being something different, right? Because I think there's two things here. When someone says, you don't understand, I can't forgive, and then versus someone that says, you don't understand, I won't.
right.
See, one probably means you need help. The other one probably means you're stubborn.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Good
won't
point.
forgive?
Yeah.
Well, being a little stubborn, aren't you? Right?
Yeah.
So I I had some help, and I also sought out mentors that I felt like at that time in my life were at least somebody to help lift me up a little bit.
Hmm.
Mentors are a fabulous, fabulous thing, especially when I didn't even have any,
Yeah. Yeah.
previous in my life. So I think there's a couple different things that point the finger, towards changing your life,
Yeah.
and and again, it comes back to is I wanted to, I didn't, my father. excuse me, my grandfather, and then his father, and then great great grandfather, there was this cycle. There was this cycle of abuse. And we can, it's easy to say that in those days, the men were very, very rough and hardened and from war and everything. And I understand that. I'm not going to deny that.
Right.
But you and I still have a choice. You and I still have a choice tomorrow. Instead of doing what we've always done, we can decide to make a little bit of a difference, of a change. And maybe that's pick up a book. Maybe that's start to get a mentor who's kind of in an area of life that where we want to be like, and have a mentor. We don't have to make huge changes, but we can make small changes,
Yeah.
So
It's interesting when you said people being in their comfort zone. The thought that just came to me was they're in their discomfort zone. They're not really happy with where they are. They're kind of like saying, I can't change. And like you came back to the I can't or I won't, because it also came to me, it was Dr. Phil. It's like, how's that working out for you, right?
I love
Which,
that saying.
we can have all kinds of opinions about Dr. Phil, but that was one of the things I love, that where he's like, how's that working out for you? So, people like yourself have said, okay, this is my legacy. How is this working out for me? It's not, right? So it's not working. I can choose to change. I don't have to be this way. I don't have to accept that. This has been such a powerful conversation. I hope people really are getting, out of it what you're saying, because when it comes to forgiveness, yes, it is a choice. You do have a choice. It's a process. You have to figure out what it is and what it's not, who it's for and who it's not for. You can say, and I can tell from this conversation, you have forgiven your father, but you're not in relationship with him. And that's okay.
Yeah. 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 That it took a while to get there.
Yeah.
As you might expect. But we got there, we got there. And I never, when I decided to forgive him, I never sat here and went, okay, damn, this might take a year. This might take 10 years. I mean, I never did that.
Right.
I just started. I just started because I knew I wanted different results, and the amount of anger and hurt that I had. I don't. I mean, I know people do it, but Brian, I can't imagine carrying it a lifetime. I just can't.
Yeah.
I just can't. How much it would have negatively affected my health, my mental health, my relationships, my happiness. It's just baffling to me,
Yeah. And another thing I just want to say before we wrap up, I mean, you're just such a great example of, again, people will say, this is the trajectory of my life. This is where it's going to go. And it can never get any better, and you're the person that said, okay, yeah, I was dealt this hand, but I can play this hand in a very different way. And you're a great example of it's never too late to make a choice. So I want to thank you for being such an inspiration.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. One last one here. Forgiveness can't change the past, and that's pretty obvious. It doesn't change anything of the past, but here's what it does do. It does change the future.
Yeah.
It does change the future, and that should be a lot of hope for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because if you started today and you started actively, intentionally saying, you know what, I'm going to forgive that person. I'm just not going to carry this around anymore. Waking up at 3 a.m. thinking about it, stealing your happiness and your joy on a vacation because you're thinking about this person who wronged you.
Oh, yeah.
You start the process of forgiving. And one day you're going to wake up and go, oh my gosh, this is kind of nice. I'm not carrying around that weight anymore. I'm not these people aren't intruding on my thoughts uninvited.
Right.
I just kind of let it go. So no, forgiveness is not going to change one thing about what happened. It's not, but it's going to change everything for you moving forward. And that should be a lot of hope and light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Scott, after listening to this, people might want to reach out to you. How can people find out more about you?
Yeah, if you want to find me you can find me on Facebook. I've got a professional page on there. Scott Stewart, author, speaker, overcomer. You can find me on there. If you send me a friend request on Facebook and I don't respond to you, don't take it personal. I generally don't respond to friend requests of people I don't know because there's so many scams and so many people doing crazy stuff.
Sure.
Then you can find me on LinkedIn. And my website, if you want to learn a little bit more about me, scottstewartspeaking.com.
Awesome.
And it's easy to find. Yeah.
Yeah. Scott, thank you so much for doing this afternoon. I appreciate it. It's been great getting to know you. I know you're going to inspire a lot of people.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that. It's been an honor to share. Hopefully we planted some seeds with the right people.
Absolutely. All right. Have a great afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Hey there, if you like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you liked. If you didn't like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you didn't like. Go to grieftogrowth.com/community and look for Talk About the Podcast. I'll see you there.